Hello and welcome to True Performance. I'm your host, Chris Widener. True performance is the ideal accomplishment of an aspiration, goal, or objective that benefits everyone involved. Here with me today is the founder and creator of True Performance, Zig Ziglar. Zig, welcome.
Well, thank you. It's good to be here.
Well, let's jump right into it. True performance and motivation. That's what we're talking about today. How does motivation play a role in true performance in life?
Well, motivation is the key to the beginning of everything, of any worthwhile endeavors. And when you start thinking about motivation, and I know I've heard it 1,000 times, and so have others, yeah, but motivation is so temporary. I agree with that, but then, you know, so is bathing and eating. But if you do both of them every day, you'll live longer and smell better. Now, if you'll keep on doing the things that got you motivated to begin with the right input in your mind, the right association, and all of those good things, then the motivation goes on and on. You can stay motivated, is what I'm saying.
Let me ask you a question. When I think of motivation, I know a lot of people, when they think of motivation, the sort of default way that we picture it is sort of an emotional kind of thing. When you think about a motivational speaker, you think of large crowds and loud music, sort of an emotion-based thing. Can you tell us how it's both emotion, but it's also reason and has to do with the cognitive mind? How does that fit both sides of motivation?
Well, I frequently say that motivation gets you going, but habit gets you there. And if you perform better while you're excited, enthusiastic, and motivated, why not just make the determination to make it a permanent thing? Well, hope is the foundational quality of all change, but encouragement is the fuel on which hope runs. Now, where do you get the encouragement? Good books. You can learn in an automobile university, and that's one of my favorite examples right there. I was a visiting scholar at the University of Southern California for a couple of years, and while there, they discovered that if you live in a metropolitan area and drive 12,000 miles a year, in 3 years' time, you can acquire the equivalent of 2 years of college. And the good news is you can choose the curriculum. Now, what I've built a career on is teaching people things that are not generally taught in formal education. And I always throw in, we gave our children all of the college they were willing to accept. But there were things they do not teach. They don't teach you, for example, how to stay motivated, how to get up when you've been knocked down, how to build a winning attitude, how do you build winning relationships. There are a lot of things they simply do not teach.
Yeah. So motivation is an attitude that we apply to ourselves. It's something we choose to have, right?
Yeah, and we choose to feed it every day. I've read an average of over 3 hours a day, for example, for over 35 years. I read good books, read my Bible every day, read the paper every day, and that way I know what both sides are up to.
So attitude, what are some of the key attitudes that we need to apply to our lives?
In my opinion, the number one attitude we need to have is the attitude of gratitude. Hans Selye, the great stress specialist, said gratitude is the healthiest of all of our human emotions. It's an absolute fact that the more you express gratitude for what you have, the more you will have to express gratitude for. It's also a fact that the more you complain about your problems, the more problems you'll have to complain about. Incidentally, Chris, what I do before I verbalize anything, write anything, or record anything, I validate it psychologically, theologically, and physiologically. Because we're physical, mental, and spiritual, and if you don't deal with all of life, you're not going to be able to get all that life has to offer. And gratitude is a marvelous attitude and a wonderful starting point for getting more of the good things out of life that are important. I often say that success is measured by some of the things you have, but that money will buy, but all of the things that money won't buy. See, money will buy you a house, but it won't buy your home. It'll buy you a companion, but won't buy you a friend. It'll buy you a good time, but it won't buy you a peace of mind. It'll buy you a bed, but it won't buy you a good night's sleep. Now, here's something rather fascinating. The more of the things you have that money won't buy, will enable you to get more of the things that money will buy. And that's a fact. Now, money is important, but it's not the most important thing in life, but it's reasonably close to oxygen. When you need it, you need it. And anybody says they're not interested in money, going to lie about other things too. But just don't ever fall in love with money. The other things are more important by far.
So talking about gratitude as an attitude, and attitude is so important, how do we be grateful in hard times? Because most people would say, well, it's easy to be grateful in easy times, but where the rubber really hits the road is in hard times. How do we become grateful during hard times?
Well, the interesting thing about hard times is something rather interesting. We should get excited about difficulties in our life because that develops character. Character develops persistence. Persistence develops performance. And you start putting all of those things together. It's the result of the difficulties that we face. When you're coasting along and everything is going rosy, just wonderfully well, man, I got it all going. Well, that's a lot of times when we begin to fall. But when we're able, and a friend of mine is writing a book titled, You Can't Climb a Smooth Mountain. In other words, you got to have a place to dig that foot in and another foot in, and then you move forward. And so the problem, we need to look at it, and we need to understand, you don't drown by falling in water. You only drown if you stay there. You don't fail by getting knocked down. You only fail if you stay down. So we look at now, how do I handle this? You identify you got a problem. People, for example, ask me for a long time, they seldom ask anymore, if 9/11 affected my travel plans. And I said, well, of course not. I don't drive my car looking in my rearview mirror. I'm not going to run my life looking over my shoulder. Besides, I happen to be a Christian, and my Bible tells me that my death date was determined before I was born. Now, if that's the case, and I know that is the case, then why should I have any fear of a terrorist?
Yeah, nothing you can do about it. Right?
Absolutely right. It's already determined, so I'm going to live life wide open, full speed ahead, expecting tomorrow to be better than today. As a matter of fact, for years I've been doing something when people ask me, when I greet people, I always say good morning. And at 9 o'clock at night, 80% of the people respond, good morning. They said, not morning. I said, then how come you just say morning? They said, because you said morning.
Right.
I said, it just proves a great point. When you go out in life looking for friends, they'll be scarce. But if you go out in life to be a friend, they'll be everywhere. Because what you send out is exactly what you get back. The message simply is that be careful about what you're sending out, unless you want to get it back yourself. And most people like to get excitement, enthusiasm, and motivation back, so send it out and you'll get it back. That's a fact.
It sounds like what you're saying is that attitude isn't dependent on circumstances.
That's exactly right. It depends on how you handle those circumstances. You can either respond, which is positive, or react, which is negative. When you get down, you admit that you are down. Instead of say, I'm not down, we call that denial. And denial is more than a river in Egypt. Denial is something we need to acknowledge. So we ask the question, I've been knocked down, now what do I do? Do I stay there or do I get up? If you decide to have a pity party, poor little me. Well, the bad news is very few people come to pity parties, and none of them being present. They just don't bring them. Yeah. So we need to say, how can I get out of this problem? And the reality is the foods you grow in the valley is what you'll eat on the mountaintops. The truth also is the God of the mountaintop is also the God of the valley. So you start looking for help. And you start thinking in terms of what can I do? And let me give you a classic example of what I'm talking about. There have been something like 30 steel companies to go belly up, or at least Chapter 11 in the last 25 years. Now, there's one steel company that has been thriving during all of these years. It's called Nucor Steel. The other companies went belly up because they were complaining about the fact that the foreign governments subsidized their steel companies, and the steel they were producing was produced, therefore, more cheaply than what we could do in America. And so they complained about the problems and went belly up. Nucor Steel took a look at it and says, well, we're just grateful that steel is so heavy because it's going to cost a bunch of money to get it shipped over here. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to build high-tech small mills. We will locate them in rural areas like Utah and Nebraska and, places like that. And we will hire farmers to make the steel. They know how to work already. It's easy to teach people how to make steel. It's hard to teach them how to work. The bottom line is they haven't had to lay off in many, many years, and their workers make between $75,000 and $100,000 a year. They responded to the challenge. When we complain about the problems increase. When we look at the opportunities increase. Am I trying to say it's easy? Absolutely not. It is difficult, but it's well worth considering, and it's well worth following that process. It makes all the difference in the world.
One of the things that I've always enjoyed listening to you talk about is how you had noticed that there were some people, even in the Depression and the hard times, who still got wealthy. They still made it. What part did attitude play in that? And maybe you could tell that story and what you noticed early on in life.
Oh, it only plays everything in it. In Yazoo City, Mississippi, heart of the Depression, small Mississippi town, I noticed as a child that some people wore nice clothes, lived in nice houses, drove nice cars. Some of them even played golf at the country club and took nice trips. And I've noticed in every decade of my life, exactly the same thing happens. Regardless of the times, if they're good, some people still have to struggle financially. If they're bad, some people still manage to survive, and not only survive, but they thrive, because they understood something which is very basic. Individually, there's nothing we can do about the national economy, but there's a great deal we can do about our personal economy. And when we accept responsibility for that, we will start looking for solutions and jobs or opportunities to make it a successful one. Heart of the Depression, I noticed that. In good times, I've noticed exactly the same thing. It has to do with our attitude. Too many people have an advanced case of stinking thinking. And when you get rid of that, then everything else begins to look a whole lot better and smell a whole lot better.
Talk to us a little bit about optimism, because that's one of the things that I found among successful people. They always believe the future's going to be better.
Yeah, absolutely. Research shows that about half of us are born as optimists and about half are born as pessimists. Now, I was born as an optimist, and I'm grateful for that. I'm the kind of guy that'd take my last $2 and buy a money belt with it. I mean, that's the way I'm structured. I'd go after Moby Dick in a rowboat and take the tartar sauce with me. When my wife goes shopping, and incidentally, she's been inducted into the MasterCard Hall of Fame. I mean, she knows about shopping, and when she goes shopping, I still just put a dime in the parking meter. I mean, now let me emphasize the point. The 1828 Noah Webster Dictionary, you will not find the word pessimism. You will find the word optimism. The nation was younger then. We had the exuberance of something new. Develop the attitude of exuberance. Develop the attitude of, man alive, there are things I can do now to make it better. Find opportunity, because it's out there. It comes knocking on a lot of doors, and many times we don't just open the door. Now, let me emphasize a point. In order to be totally and completely, phenomenally successful, you're going to need a big frying pan. Now, I don't know if you recognize the name Gentleman Jim Corbett. He was a former heavyweight champion of the world. He loved to fish. One morning he was out doing his road work, and he noticed there was a fisherman at this lake he was running around, and the fisherman was having a fisherman's dream day. I mean, he'd cast out and pull in. He'd cast out and pull in. But Corbett noticed something. He noticed that he was keeping the little fish and throwing the big ones back. So he ran over to him and he said, "Sir," he said, "I'm a fisherman myself, but I've never seen anybody do what you're doing. Why, you're keeping the little fish and throwing the big ones back. What on earth are you doing?" And the fisherman sadly shook his head and he said, "Oh, man, you can't know how badly I hate to do this, but I don't have any choice. You see, all I've got is just this little old bitty frying pan." Let me tell you something. God doesn't make little frying pans. Many times people will say, well, I've just got that little frying pan, and besides, don't give me such a big dream. Just give me a little one. I'm just a little guy. Just let me survive. Don't give me the big one. But the optimistic, attitude-driven person will say, when they've got that big idea, if I don't take advantage of it, somebody else will discover it and do that. How many times have I encountered people who say, I had that idea years ago, and I really knew it was a good one, but I just didn't have the courage to go ahead. What I'm really saying is, look, you were designed for accomplishment. You're engineered for success. You're endowed with the seeds of greatness. Get involved in yourself. Take that attitude of gratitude. Take that positive attitude. Continue to educate yourself and grow all the time. When I get in my automobile, only about one time out of 50 am I listening to the radio. And if I am, it's always a program that has some real character, qualities, and value in it. I'm listening to CDs that teach me things that I want to know and need to know. I protect my attitude and my persona everywhere I go, and I'm getting a good education in my automobile.
Still to this day?
To this very day, absolutely. You go out in my car right now, and you won't find me listening to the radio. You will see some CDs laying there on the seat, unless I have to press the button and pull the one out I just finished listening to, or am still in the midst of listening to, teaching me things. Can I give you another little story?
Yeah.
My executive assistant, Laurie Majors, finished the 10th grade. She's been with me 28 years. A few years ago, we validated, we tested all of our key employees, and she's certainly key. She checked out at slightly above the master's degree level.
Wow.
Now, you don't move from 10th grade to master's degree 1 week, 1 month, or even 1 year. But every morning on the way to work, she's listening to a CD that's teaching her things she wants to know or needs to know. On the way home, it's exactly the same thing. She reads good books. She goes to good seminars. She's always on the grow. Now, we're the training company, Ziglar Training System. We send out lots of proposals. Most of them are just for a few $1,000s, but some of them are big. Yeah. The person who has the final say on what goes out is Laurie Majors. And when it crosses her desk, she either puts okay on it or no. She checks it out from a financial point of view by checking with our CPA. She checks it out legally to make certain we're on safe ground. She does it all, and then when she said, okay, it's understandable, it's easy to read and understand, I think we can let this proposal go. It's not where you start. It's where you go. And in Automobile University, you can learn some things. University of Southern California did the study. Here's what they found. If you live in a metropolitan area, in 3 years' time, if you drive 12,000 miles a year, you can acquire the equivalent of 2 years of college education. Yes, those are goals that you can achieve. That's an attitude you can acquire right there in your automobile. You can get new knowledge, new information, and new inspiration to keep on going.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned that half the people born are tendencies toward pessimism. Okay, so that means half the people watching us, statistically, would be a tendency towards pessimism. But they're saying, you're right, Zig, you fired me up. I need to change my attitude. What can those people do to begin to change the course of their life?
Another true story. Birmingham, Alabama, a number of years ago, Laurie received a call from a lady there who was just really down in the dumps. She was complaining that, she hated the job she had, and she knew I was coming to town, and she knew that I could help her get out of the doldrums there, and would I please talk to her. I agreed to do so, and a few minutes before I was to speak, she showed up backstage, which was what we had asked her to do. Yeah. As she walked across the stage, I was on the other side behind the curtain, and she walked on the stage. She was just stomping her feet. I mean, I've never seen so much anger in a walk. And when she saw me, she almost started crying. Oh, I'm just so glad to see you. I got this terrible job. I just hate it. Can you do something about it? I said, and she's the kind of lady, you know, that could brighten up a whole room by leaving it, if you know what I mean. She really was. And I said, ma'am, I got an idea, and it'll work if you're willing to do it. She said, I'll try anything within reason. I said, okay. I noticed you got your notebook in your hand. Let me get you to open it, and we'll go over it. She just stood there. I said, no, go ahead, open the notebook so I can share these thoughts with you. She just stood there. See, she had come there thinking that nice Mr. Ziglar was going to help solve her problem. Now, I wanted to get her involved. She didn't want to get involved. Well, I got to tell you, Chris, I can't solve anybody's problem. Not yours, not mine, not anybody else's. I can solve mine. But what I'm getting at is something very simple. I will teach you the process, but you've got to do the work. You've got to follow the action. I said, ma'am, now, if you're not going to get involved in this, we're both wasting our time. So unless you do, the interview is now over. Well, with a little anger, she opened her notebook because I wanted her to list the things about the job she did enjoy. And she said, I don't like nothing about that job. I said, well, ma'am, just as a matter of curiosity, do they pay you for working there? She said, well, of course they do. And I said, and you don't like to be paid? Well, she said, of course I do. I said, well, now, a minute ago you said you didn't like nothing about it. I asked you one question, and you finally say, well, I do like this about it. She said, well, I didn't know you was talking about that. I said, you mean to tell me you don't think money's important? Oh, she said, it didn't say that either. I said, well, now, let's see if we can find something else you like about the job. Before we finished, in a matter of minutes, we had 22 things she liked about her job. Wow. Not only did they pay her there, they paid her above average. She had a wonderful retirement program built into it. She had life insurance, health insurance, accident insurance. She lived less than 10 minutes from the office. She was on a bonus program, was in on management decisions. I mean, the whole 9 yards. Wow. I said, now, ma'am, what I want you to do is this. When you get home tonight, I want you to take this list, get right in front of the mirror, and with great excitement, I want you to look yourself in the eye and say, I love my job because they pay me for working there. I love my job because they pay me above average for working there. I love my job because of my retirement program. I love my job. I love my job. I love my job. I love my job. And I said, ma'am, every time you say I love my job, you're really saying, I'm grateful for my job because you're adopting the healthiest of all human emotions. Now, I'm going to make a strong statement. Tonight, when you get home, that's what I want you to do. Tomorrow, take the list with you, because tomorrow on the job, you will find other things or remember other things you also are grateful for. You see, you've been a fault finder. Now we're moving you into being a good finder. And the bottom line is, she left kind of with a smile on her face, you know. Fast forward 6 weeks. I was back in Birmingham, Alabama, doing a sales training program. And now she wasn't in sales, but she had gotten the tapes. In those days, they were tapes. Now they're CDs. Right. And had been listening every morning and every evening on the way home. And there she was, and she had learned that everybody's in sales. They might not be selling a product, but they're in sales. Everybody, every day of their lives. So there she sat on the front row of the sales presentation, grinning so wide she could have eaten a banana sideways. I mean, she was excited. I said, well, how you doing? She said, Mr. Ziglar, I'm doing wonderfully well. She said, you can't believe how much those people down there have changed. Now, what had happened? Number one, she had changed the input into her mind. Number two, she had listened carefully and realized that she was having a lot of fun and a lot of good things were happening in her life. And number three, she determined that, yes, she could have a future right where she was. Now, here's the rest of that little story. The truth is, she had been raised in a home where the son had gotten all of the attention, and they always bragged on him, the parents did, and they're always criticizing her as the daughter. And guess what kind of man she married? Exactly the same kind. The reason mothers cry at weddings is because they fear their daughter's marrying a man just like their father. And, you know, that can bring on some tears. So the interesting thing is, then she took stock of the way her parents had treated her and realized that despite the fact that they had not done the right thing in every way. They had provided her protection. They had given her a good education. They had provided her a home. They had done all of the things that really were important. And then she started evaluating her husband. He was faithful to her. He was a good provider. He was a hard worker. And basically, he had never abused her in any way, just had more or less ignored her along the way and so forth. And what happened was, and the same thing at the church, she started finding the good in the church she was attending, in her husband, and in her parents. You see, when you change in one area of life, it affects every area of life. And the change on the job affected every other change in her life, in all of her relationships. And it all goes right back to the attitude. The attitude was changed because she changed the input in her mind. Psychologist Elmstetter says you cannot change from a negative perspective to a positive perspective without changing the input in what you're putting in your mind. It affects every one of your relationships. It affects every one of your performances. It affects everything in your life. So above all things, and you know the Proverbs say, protect your mind, because out of it, protect your heart, because out of it come the issues of life. Put in the good, the clean, the pure, the powerful, the positive. Associate with good people. Think in terms of how you can increase your performance, how you can be a better husband, a better wife, a better mom, a better dad. Start putting it all together, and when you do that, balance comes in your life. And with balance, where you have the right priorities, then it really does make a huge difference in your life. When I talk about priorities, it's one of the things that we need to understand what is important. Well, Dr. James Merritt did some research and found that the Gallup poll revealed that by a count of 10 to 1, people are more interested in their relationships they have with their loved ones and relationships in their job than, any other single thing. Their home life is very important, and yet they spend all of their time on the job, trying to get money and trying to get ahead in the corporate world. When in reality, if they spent less time there and more time on their relationships, they could have both of them and be happy and healthy and reasonably prosperous and secure, and all of the things that go along with it. I had the privilege of visiting with a young man a number of years ago. Had been brought to my office, and he was talking about success. You know, he was a fan of his boss, who he thought was the most successful man in the world. And I asked him what was success, and he identified what I talked about earlier. And I said, well, let's evaluate your boss. And we did, and we found out that he wasn't happy. He had ulcers. He was just making a whole lot of money, and that was about it. And this young man, Steve Walker, from Toronto, Canada, was there, and he was following his boss. And he finally realized that he was not really successful, and so he determined to make a change. Now, he had been working about 70 hours a week, Steve had, and so I persuaded him that if he started using his mind instead of just of his body, he could do even more, and so he agreed to do that. 6 years later, I was in Baltimore, Maryland, making a talk at a seminar, and a young man came up to me, and he said, you remember me? And I said, no, I really don't. He said, well, I'm the guy that came down from Toronto, Canada. I said, you're Steve Walker? He said, yeah. I took your advice. I started using my mind instead of just my body. I found out I don't have to work 12 hours a day. I can spend less time, get better jobs, get an education. My home life dramatically improved, and I want to show you some real growth. And he pulled out this picture. And it was 6 years after he'd been in Dallas, and the picture is of his new addition to the family, who now was 4 years old. This is real growth. My family life has never been better. My public life has never been better. I'm more financially prosperous in every phase of my life because I got my priorities in order.
That's all the time we have for today, and I'd like for you, our audience, to remember that your attitude is vital to your personal growth, success, and true performance.